This is a weekly event that we do. We cover three major topics in our GIMI think tank. What are the most important trends that are facing society? And as a result, the world will change. And what can we do to innovate to make a better future based on the trends? Number two, we talk about innovation management. What are the latest techniques for doing innovation management? How do we compress the time to be able to do bigger, bolder ideas, cheaper and faster? And today's speaker will talk about that to a large extent also, but also we'll talk about trends and other things. And the last part is we like to know what's going on in other parts of the world on innovation. And so we check in on Japan, we check in on Turkey, South Africa. And so we had different speakers speak about what's going on in their own countries about innovation at the economic development level, at the corporate level, at the university level, and also in nonprofits. And so we always cover these three topics. And as a result, we want to stay on the cutting edge of innovation 4.0 and lead the whole community of innovation experts around the world to make sure that they can get the latest ideas and networks around here. Each person over here in this community is accessible. They are looking forward to connecting with you. So please reach out to each other and find your own pathways to create 1 + 1 is 3 or 4. Thank you very much. Erila, please, our speaker today.
Thank you. So today we have the pleasure, I have the pleasure to introduce Johan, hopefully I pronounced well, Persson, the partner from Rhubarbs, which is a consulting firm in Sweden. He will talk about how maps and innovation roadmaps change the approach, how we approach innovation and strategy. He is a management consultant for a long time. He has worked and has in-depth knowledge on early startups, scale-ups, corporate startups. He has 2 masters, one in engineering physics and one MBA from INSEAD. He basically has been and is, I believe, a partner of Innovation 360. And he has struggled in the beginning to develop and execute innovation strategies with our roadmap. And he saw the value of roadmaps, innovation roadmaps as we have in GIMI. And after that, he has been using lots of tools to guide organization through this entire innovation process. We talk a lot about our innovation management framework and roadmaps. And here it's another point of view. How Johan has done this in Sweden and basically Nordic countries. So we are glad to hear more about that and definitely brainstorm together and discuss together of what we have seen as well in other parts of the world. And what makes sense is not one tool better than the other, but definitely it's more the power of to talk about the power of roadmaps and how we can use more of this in order to execute better innovation strategies in companies. Johan, the floor is yours.
So Johan, as you get started, you can start presenting and Johan can start presenting also. Just a couple of things. I was impressed by your background, physics and also business. And I've got a similar background also. I got a PhD in engineering, but an undergrad in physics, and then I got an MBA. And there's something about integrative thinking, being able to think in business and technology and all that. And these are not often skill sets that you see with everybody. And we also notice that in innovation, that the amount of integrative thinking is critical. And something about you specifically, which makes you different compared to the average engineer who wants to do innovation or the average MBA who wants to do innovation. If you don't mind also using, as you talk about what you're talking about, bring in this thing called integrative lateral thinking, which is critical about the multidisciplinary types of skills required to be the most impactful innovators also. But Johan, I was intrigued by your background, and it's a great background. I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Yeah, so I think what you're saying, being integrative, I think that's key when you talk about innovation. It's also key when you talk about strategy. So if you look back to John Boyd, who some of you might know, he talks a lot about the OODA loop. And in the OODA loop, he talks about 2 very specific behaviors in the observe and orient phase. And one is analysis, which we all get trained to do, where you take something and you break it apart into pieces and you look at all the pieces. But then it talks about synthesis, which is using your creativity to take different parts and make something bigger out of it. And I think that's key to real innovation. And I think that's also key to really effective strategy. And that's really quite uncommon, because you have to have a good enough understanding of the pieces that you get, and a large enough understanding of the problems that you do. And for that, you might need a broad experience set.
Johan, just to add to that, we used to work at Arthur de Little, one of the world's first management consulting firms. And they were one of the leaders on innovation and technology and really driving it to the forefront of what it's become today. And they used to hire people who were either PhD scientist types with an MBA, or architects with an MBA or economics degree, or entrepreneur with an MBA. So it was always this thing called a mindset, which was kind of like experimental and iterative and kind of broad thinking, but embedded not only was the integrative, but also a mindset to experiment and iterate, which was not in the accountant, which was not in the standard professions, which says do it right the first time. And so there's another dimension of it, saying you want to be integrated, but you also have the mindset of experiment and iterate. And in physics, the thought experiment, where you think inside your head and experiment, what if, what else, is also part of that mindset. And I've seen, again, a track record that the best people to hire into this innovation spaces typically have this integrative, but also an experimental mindset.
Yeah, I definitely think so. That this, so you call it integrative, I talk about synthesis. I think that's really key if you're going to be in a sort of a major innovation role. So, you asked what makes me kind of different. I think, so many of my opinions, I don't think are very stand out for anyone else's. One of the key things here is that I've been working with and really thinking about commercialization of technology for a very long time, all the way back since 2004, 2005. And I've collected ideas for how to do that in the most effective way. And today I'm going to talk about sort of the latest thing that I found that I think is extremely helpful when you look at the strategy side of innovation, which is something called Wardley maps, which I would like to talk about now.
You have the air.
So I hope everyone sees the presentation.
Yes, we can.
So this used to be me when I worked as a management consultant focused on innovation. I would collect good opportunities in sort of a laundry list. And you can do this in many different ways. You can use tools like Pestle or Pest. You can do ideations. You can do customer journeys. You can do all kinds of things to gather good ideas for strategic change. And you get a long list of them. And then, of course, once you have a list, you try to figure out, okay, out of all these ideas, out of all these options, which ones should I use? And the normal thing here is to use some form of analysis to try and rank this list. So you have one way of doing it is to look at what the impact of all of these options have, how hard are they to implement, how much impact are they going to get. We want to do good bang for our buck, so maybe we choose, in this case, maybe we choose number 3. Another way of looking at it is that you want a balanced portfolio of all these options. You want to look at, have some sort of balance between very low risk, where we just look at existing things for our existing technology for our existing market, but you also want to do some things that are out there and that can be radical innovations. So, but how do we know, out of all of these, are we making the right choice? Did we find the right winner when we did our analysis? And for me, it was always a big question, because we're gambling a company's future on these options that we more or less made up, or through analysis we tried to find. How can we make sure that we do the absolute best job of choosing the right option that is going to give the biggest strategic impact for us? So in order to do that, I couldn't really find the answer until I found what we call Wardley maps. And I'll try to make a little bit of an allegory here, or a connection to what's going on in the real world with military strategy. Because strategy originates from the military side. So it's Greek-ish for something like guide the army or direct the army. So if we look at a very, very old army problem, and let's see how our approach might function there. So this guy that you see here is Themistocles. Does anyone know who Themistocles is? Anyone has an idea?
You got everybody stuck here.
Yeah, everyone's stuck. Well, he's a Greek general, or rather, he was a Greek general, and he has a problem because the Greek have pissed off the the biggest empire in the world at that time, the Persians, and their king or their emperor Darius is not very happy, so he's coming for the Greeks. So a very, very large army is coming to invade Greece, and we got to figure out something to do about it. And we can probably come up with a lot of options to do that. But how are we going to know which ones of these options to resist the Persians we're going to use? Can we do a laundry list and look at impact versus difficulty? Can we look at the risk and have a balanced risk portfolio when we're trying to keep the Persians out of Greece? It's going to be very difficult if we do it this way. So you can think about it, and I don't think Themistocles will be very happy doing that, having that approach to getting the Persians to stay away, because he's missing something. He's missing a map. So using a map can all of a sudden describe and find a possible strategy that might succeed. So he knows that he has a relatively smaller army than the Persians do. He knows that the Persians have to supply this very large army. So what can you do given that you know what the landscape and what the map is like? So what they ended up doing, and this is of course very famous, is that they had a very small force of Greek soldiers that held back the Persian army at Thermopylae, while at the same time they kept the navy, the Persian navy, away. That had to go around, and then they beat the navy separately and starved them out essentially. So all of a sudden, this very relatively complex strategy that Themistocles developed is pretty easy to see and understand once we have a map. So with a map, it's a lot easier to actually find and describe a strategy that we believe is going to win. It's much easier to have a certainty about that, whether this option is the best possible that we have or not. So how can we do that in business? So I know that these ranking exercises, it's better than nothing, but is it believable? Is having a risk spread or a balanced risk portfolio, is that believable? Is that how we're going to really win? So if we instead look at a map, we got to figure out what are the characteristics of maps. We got to find something that we can use in business, because in business we can't use the map of Greece. Here we have a very, very rudimentary map of Sweden, where we have Gothenburg, Stockholm, and Malmö, which are the three largest cities in Sweden. We can see here that if we move them around, this will have different meaning. And only one of them will have be a fair representation of Sweden. So what we actually need is some form of anchor. So in a normal geographic map, we have a sense of north and south and east and west. And having that in place, all of a sudden, where Stockholm is placed and Gothenburg is placed and Malmö is placed has meaning. If we move Malmö to the right, that has meaning in a map. So a map has a visual representation of what we're trying to do. It's context specific. So this map is a map of Sweden. The position relative to some form of anchor, so in this case, north, south, east, and west, has meaning. And we can also show movement. So we can show that something is moving from Stockholm to Malmö here, or from Stockholm to Gothenburg, or vice versa. So there's actually a map available for business. And it's something called the Wardley map after its creator, Simon Wardley. And everything related to mapping is Creative Commons, share alike. So all the stuff you see here is share alike, and you can read up on it and use as you wish. And in the Wardley map, you use the customer or the customer need as the anchor. And then everything else is relative to that. So we get a value chain that goes all the way from the customer all the way down to the basic end input of what is created, what is needed to create value for that customer. And then you can see we have an x-axis here that we can also relate to. And the x-axis is made up of this type of evolutionary curve, where we have a starting point in Genesis, where whatever we have, the technology is unknown and the market doesn't know anything, so everything is novel. But through competition, we come into something where we have custom-built solutions. From custom-built solutions, we get into the product stage, and over time, if there's enough competition, we will come into the commodity stage. And through that, we get the x-axis of the map. So a very sort of rudimentary, easy description of the 4 stages. The first one is Genesis, where we have invention. And if we think about what's the activity there, we need to invent something if we find it there. In this phase, there's lots of failure, we tolerate failure is assumed. In the custom-made phase, we're all of a sudden into a much more known territory. We still have to make it ourselves. Someone has figured it out, but we have to make it ourselves. We can't buy it from anywhere. It's special every time for every customer. Failure happens here, but it's not really surprising, but it's disappointing when it happens. Then we get into the product stage. This is a place where we probably can rent a product or buy a product that does whatever we try to achieve. Failure is not tolerated, and we do everything we can to keep it away. And then we get into the commodity, and everything is available there to buy on tap. And everything is very effective, and we're really surprised by failure. So this is a very rudimentary description. There's lots more to this that you can read up on if you wish, but I think this is going to be enough to understand the rest of the talk here. So with this map, we can start to challenge, and we can start to predict developments. So we can understand movements and positions. So if we look at this particular map, it's of a tea shop. So we have a customer, and he wants a cup of tea. For a cup of tea, he needs tea and he needs hot water. And for hot water, we need water, and we need a kettle. And a kettle needs electricity. Now, if we look at this map, we see that for some reason, we have custom-made kettles in this tea shop. Now, maybe that's right or maybe that's wrong, but we can definitely challenge that assumption, because we can see that if we take a walk from the customer to the kettle, it's 1, 2, 3 steps. So the customer is likely not going to care that much about the kettle that's boiling the water. So, at some point in time, kettles probably were custom made a long, long time ago. But now they're in the world around us, kettles are probably a commodity. So they moved to the right. And that happens all over the place. So through competitions, components in this map will always move to the right. So that's something called a climatic pattern. So So we can also see that we are using this custom-made kettle, but for some reason we haven't moved to a commodity. So that means we have some sort of stoppage here, some sort of inertia that is stopping us from moving the kettle into commodity. So that's another thing that we can see, another climactic pattern. So there's going to be inertia to change. And there's all kinds of these patterns that we can use and identify in the map. And if we use the full toolkit, we can really make very advanced maps of what a business does. So this is Simon Wardley's original business for Tango, which was a photo sharing site in 2005, where they built a platform, a coding platform, based on the first sort of cloud compute. So they sat along and they waited for compute to become available as a commodity in the cloud. Amazon did it in 2005, and then they launched this platform. And the platform is a listening device. So they open the platform for others. Others will build new uncharted innovations on it, and they listen to those. And they had a plan to commoditize the good stuff that will come out, and so on and so forth. So you can make very elaborate strategies using maps. So you could definitely question now with what I've shown you, what does this actually have to do with innovation? And what does it have to do with innovation management? Well, it has quite a lot to do with innovation management. So the first thing is that we can start to describe the type of innovation we're doing in a rather simple way and in a graphical way. So one thing we can do is that we have a customer, and maybe the customer has a completely new need, or we believe they have a completely new need. So that's one type of innovation. Or maybe the customer has an existing need, but we're going to serve that need in a new or better way. So that's also possible to show in a graphical way here. So that means we have two types of innovation, and these are the external types of innovations. And then you can have internal innovation. So what we can do, of course, is to replace the old value chain that we have with a more effective new value chain. So we can go from compute in a data center to compute in the cloud, for instance. And then the fourth thing is to actually improve the value chain, the existing value chain that we have, to make it flow better, have better capital flows, or faster capital flows, or something like that. So that means we're down to 4 types of innovation that we do. So it really quite simplifies how we think about what types of innovations do we have to deal with. And then organizational changes or changes in behavior or changes in practice can all be mapped in to these 4. What we also get is a little bit of help when we think about what type of approach we need to have when we evaluate innovation in our map. So when we focus on what type of, how do we actually conduct experiments? So if we're here in Genesis, it's all gambling and driven by gut feeling. In custom made, we're trying to explore a found value, so early stage. In the product or rental space, we're actually doing market analysis and we listen to customers, because here customers actually know what they want. And then in the commodity or utility state, it can be metric driven and build what is needed. So for instance, I work for an aluminum company. Quite a few of our products were commodity, where Daimler would want a type of aluminum that was easier to form. So we could actually measure formability, and more formability will be better. That's an example of that. So, and again, there are more aspects of maps that really has a big impact on innovation management, but I think we'll leave it at that here. So let's look at some examples from the real world before we open up for discussion. And these are all cases that we've done with clients. So the first case here is an innovation project that we developed a new strategy for. So in this case, we have a customer which has some sort of big opportunity, and this is anonymized for the sake of our customer, of course. And there's a very costly process that they do right now. and it's manual. In this particular project, they are actually going to take this boring, inefficient manual process and make it completely automated through robotics. The robotics will then be able to utilize all kinds of new inventions in this particular field. But to make it happen, we also have to do some specific tooling. And in this case, the client had two options that they were going to do both before we came in. And one of them looked like this. You have some sort of digital technology here, a next generation tool, and two digital technologies. And the other option is the current generation, which is analog. And here it was pretty clear that they should probably drop one of these options to make this a much faster project and a much cheaper project. So which option do you think we recommended them to drop? Does anyone in the audience have a guess? You have 50% chance.
Write your comments in the chat and see. Let's get people thinking and adding comments here. I think.
And if you, it would also be great if you can actually motivate your choice. If you don't want to, it's okay. But if you can motivate your choice, it's also great. So I don't see the chat really, but what do we have?
Well, you got analog.
So are we going to keep the analog or are we going to drop the analog?
People are being shy here because I think
Yeah, very shy.
Yeah.
So Hitendra, what do you think? What did we tell the client to do? What do you think? You have 50%.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's clear that you want to look at the map and see where the customer really is, and it seems like customers in the product plus rental area.
Yeah.
Therefore, you might want to see where the most overlap is, and looks like you want to continue advancing. So maybe option 2 sounds more interesting to me right now.
Yeah. So that's what we said. That okay. So the customer here, he has a big value here in this opportunity. And we have all these things that we're going to do that is going to be difficult. So why are we trying to build that on this digital option where we have part of the value chain, which is, okay, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps away from the real customer value? Why are we trying to invent all the way over here? It's no use. We can do that in a different project and look at this specifically, perhaps. But here it was pretty clear that if they just kept option 2, that was the best chance of success for this massive customer value. And I actually spoke to this client. This map was done something like two and a half years ago. I spoke to them very recently, and this project is now launched actually without option 1. So success for them. And they're going to revolutionize this particular field.
Cristanto is saying you should drop digital.
Yeah, we're dropping digital. Exactly.
So, no, but Johan, it's clear. I mean, in a matter of a few minutes, people don't know this industry, they don't know the topic, but the map allows us to talk as if we can make decisions by just looking at it, saying that's out of bounds, that's inbounds, that adds value, that does not add value. So it's clearly a powerful tool to take 5 people in a room and say, what should we do? Exactly.
And the map facilitates discussion in a very, very effective way, because all of a sudden you discuss the map instead of people's opinions. So people have opinions about the maps, and we're always basing those discussions that we have in what's the value for the customer. So it's very effective that way. So a second, this is the last example, and then I'm also done with the talk. Is we've done a pretty big portfolio strategy using this, where we had a client that felt that they have they lack customer focus, they have a tendency to reinvent the wheel, and it's kind of an engineering organization where everyone just wants to sit on their chamber and write code. So what we did is we looked through the whole portfolio. So they didn't actually make bikes, cars, robots, and submarines, but that's how we did it. So we did one map per product area and found options for all the areas, and could sort of summarize that using the maps. So what's going on for them? So what we found is that they had very little of sort of innovative high value offerings here in the custom made space. But what they did have was kind of capabilities that are custom, that is very, they work in a highly regulated industry. So knowledge about how you pass things through regulation is kind of specific, and it's really what has made them survive for a long time. But then we found lots of instances where they have technology that they build themselves, slow, very prone to errors, etc. And also building components. And again, this is code. So lots of components that they build in-house are available through open source, which then will be representative of something in the commodity space. So that's a problem for them. So they waste a lot of resources building these capabilities far away from the client and without any major customer value. They didn't really know the customer needs very well. It's partly due to how the industry is structured, but it's very clear in the maps. So an initiative to try and do that more was initiated. And again, this tendency to build in-house without much value is shown all over the maps. And what we could clearly see was that they had a lot of opportunity here to try and use their regulatory knowledge and build on these open source commodity sources and build new innovation up here based on this. So these are the patterns that we found and could really use to generate new options for their portfolio. And they could discuss these options now in a very effective way in the management teams using the maps. And they could argue, all of a sudden they had arguments for why they should not build these very specialized components. Because before, it was difficult to say which ones should we build and which ones should we not build. How do you separate between the two? And the maps really help with that. So through using maps, we could actually make very effective and believable laundry lists of options that we vetted. And we've used this in all kinds of innovation projects and in all kinds of strategy projects, and it's really a very effective tool. So I highly recommend anyone who is in innovation management to at least read a little bit about Wardley maps and have a look at how they might be useful. So with that, if you want to get in touch with me, you have an email. You can find me on LinkedIn, and you can also find me now and then on Twitter if you use that platform. So I open up for any questions anyone might have.
Then let's get the name right again.
Yeah.
It's spelled Johan. How do you pronounce it in Sweden?
In Sweden, you say Johan or Johan if you're from the north of Sweden. But I'm now in the south of Sweden, so you can say Johan.
Johan. All right.
Yeah.
One, first of all, fantastic presentation. I think it's very actionable. It's very specific. I think if somebody even spends even half an hour, 1 hour to really study it, they could probably understand it really well. Probably need a lot of practice to make really good use of it, of course. But I think it's very powerful. I got a couple of questions, and then we'll get questions in the chat going to get us started.
Yeah.
One of the challenges that I face when I work with big companies is there's a group of people who are all about risk averse and doing what they're comfortable doing.
Yeah.
And they don't want to deviate too far away to the left or right of your maps that you drew out on the vertical. And so anytime they see this very structured proposing, this is where the customer value is, this is where we should be working in, they'll immediately say no and no to the other things. But there should be a second map in my, and I think you probably have it, which is about early adopters and lead users, which is a different customer group and where they are working on. And therefore it gives us an insight into where R&D or where innovation projects should be working on, so that not only are we protecting the current competitive landscape, but we're also getting ready for the future competitive landscape of what's going to come next. So the two S curves that you're talking about in here. How do you manage that with your clients? Because our bigger problem is most people who are not in innovation are near term and incremental. Well, we have to help them do this and this. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so one thing you can do with these maps is that people in general, so there's a framework called pioneers, settlers, and town planners that goes along with the maps. And pioneers are usually the people that works very far left in a map. They invent new things. They put things together with duct tape, essentially, and make it work the first time. And then you have the settlers that take these innovations and make them into products that work. And then you have the town planners that are really about setting up, they're the Six Sigma people that takes away all the variation, everything works exactly the same all the time. And people have a tendency to be, drawn to one of these three sort of archetypes. So a pioneer is probably not going to be extremely good at the town planner job. It's going to be against his nature, at least. So it's closer related to that. And then, of course, the customer needs, as you said, if you have something that's very far to the left, that's definitely an early adopter thing. Whereas as you move along, so it's not a one-to-one with the diffusion theory of Moore. So there's a whole explanation for how diffusion theory goes together with with evolutionary theory, which we don't have time to go into here, but there's a whole description on that. But you can generalize and say that the early adopter is going to be far to the left. Yeah.
But my challenge isn't the understanding on how to read the map and where the points are.
I get that. Yeah.
My challenge is I am sitting there with the head of marketing.
Yeah.
And the head of marketing only cares about current customer, current needs usually. I'm sitting with the operation guy, and the operation really guy who just want to make things much more scalable and efficient. And I'm talking to the R&D guys and some of the business development people are saying, we're hearing these new things, and their voice, as loud as they are yelling, they get suppressed. And so the whole R&D portfolio or the innovation portfolio goes back to core business and current customers, while we need to make sure we've got to be doing the parallel thing. So my question over here is, what we do is we'll say, which of this is key for success now? What's key for success tomorrow? And now we separate out two types of investments, which is make money now and make sure you got a great future tomorrow. And we say R&D, you guys have to work on that. But it's always a battle. And so I was just thinking your map.
So what you're describing is what you would hear in a Wardley sense. It's what you're describing is what we call this inertia, right? The blockage for movement.
Yep.
And there are strategies to get around inertia. So one thing is you have to get over the inertia of your own organization, which is difficult. And there are strategies for it, but there's no guarantee that you can actually do it, right? You're going to have this problem, and you can separate out a smaller budget to do innovation and show what the future is going to be like, and so on and so forth. That might work or it might not work. You never know. But what we can also do is we can map the competitors and see what they are facing, because your competitors are going to have lots of inertia as well. So if you can actually get around the inertia and be the first, that can actually be a route to competitive advantage, where you can actually use inertia in a good way for yourself.
That's great.
But so you can definitely point out inertia. There are strategies in the Wardley mapping toolbox to get around it, but it's not easy. But at least you get it on the table.
We have a question from Cristanto, and then I see a question that Guy had written on the chat. So Guy, I'm going to ask you to ask the question after Cristanto.
Thank you, Hitendra. Johan, I love your lecture. I think so logical, so clear. Some more examples, then I can practice it. But I have two issues. One is because I listen also to Hitendra on the power of N. Okay, so sometimes situation is that you cannot choose this or that. You need probably to do both for the sake of speed or change of environment in the future, right? Secondly, your evolution chart from the x-axis, we assume that they are all the distance are the same, right? From one phase to another, but in this disruptive age, I'm afraid that some are so short, so that they are jumping from the initiation to the implementation and commodity so quick. Like in Indonesia, when we have this pandemic, the COVID, talking about purchasing, buying, paying online was a novelty, right? Suddenly, during the COVID, everybody do that. So it's like a commodity already without going into those phases of customization and things like that. Suddenly, boom, they're all going to commodity. So how do you manage that in this disruptive era that your graph may be skewed to the right or to the left, that it will give you a different interpretation? Thank you.
Yeah. So let me, you might have to repeat the first question, but let me ask the second, answer the second question first. So you're saying that, so e-commerce in Indonesia went from non-existent to a commodity extremely fast. But one of the reasons why that could happen is that there were systems available from the rest of the world, from other markets, that were already consumable as commodities. So whereas your view of, so the reality in Indonesia was not the reality of the world. So you talk about the world not being evenly distributed, right? So oftentimes you can go out and look out into the world and see where is the world at. And then you can see that, okay, so the world, maybe the world has already commoditized, but you're stuck in product. That means you're going to be left behind and you're going to be at a competitive disadvantage if you do that. And if you had done this and you were an Indonesian e-commerce operator, you could have been ready for COVID potentially. So that's sort of one of the reasons there. And okay, the world is moving fast. That means you have to be very agile. So there are ways you have to act and work. And there's another thing in the Wardley toolbox there. We talk about doctrine. So generally applicable and useful patterns to become faster and responding faster to quick change. And that's not easy. So you can conceptualize it and understand it using Wardley maps or the toolbox around Wardley maps. But that doesn't mean it's very simple to do, unfortunately.
Yeah, the thing is that our company in Indonesia is actually formulating innovation strategy for our local market, our Indonesian big market, right? But we are aware that there are technologies and innovation all over the world that suddenly come into Indonesian market, and it's just a question of how quick you react to that. If you are not following the fast track, then you are late, and then you are dead, kind of thing. But my point is, when you are relying on reading the graphs, the chart and patterns, then when all of these evolution states are not the same size as what you draw in the graph, then the reading will be very different. You know what I mean? I mean, it can be very skewed, not south and east and west will become very different. Thank you.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
Excellent. I think Geir, you had another question, if you don't mind joining us and turning your camera on. And
yes, hello. I'm Geir from Norway. My question is how you use it in a project or projects, because innovation has many phases, and the early phases, you don't know all that much. So how do you use it in a team, and how do you present it for management, for instance? That's the first question. And the second is then, if you only present it to top management when you're ready with the first phases of innovation in concept phase, or do you present a lot of them to top management?
So the first question about uncertainty and so on. So there's always going to be uncertainty, of course, in innovation projects. What we've found using this is that normally we get a much better, what we call situational awareness of what's going on. And we can see if this innovation that we're attempting, what's the actual impact on the customer. And I talked to a client of mine and who is an avid design thinking enthusiast. And for him, a big power of the Wardley map is that it actually connects sort of the front end of standard design thinking, like the customer journey, and it actually connects it to what you actually have to do to execute that customer journey. So it doesn't take away the uncertainty, but it gives you sort of a better motivation for what innovation you're actually going to try and execute. And it gives you a better motivation for why you should spend the budget to evaluate an option. And in terms of talking to upper management and using maps to do that, first of all, the maps that you actually develop in a workshop are going to be much messier than what you saw here. So a lot of times you have to simplify the map in order for it to be an effective use of communication. But once you have that, most management that I've done this with buy into it very quickly, and they can see the logic behind what you're trying to do. Okay. And then, so what was the second question?
It was more about if you pitch it once or if you pitch it in several phases.
So I in my experience, it's more like you do it once for the motivation, and then of course you can evaluate it, and there's an outcome and so on and so forth. But usually the map is there for the motivation, unless you find something that completely changes the map, of course. But for me, usually in sort of standard innovation projects that we do the mapping first, then we prototype the solution, and then we find some sort of way to incubate whatever we find. But the map is really in the beginning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Geir. Johan, as you were thinking, as sharing this, a couple of things came into mind. I used to be at Motorola, and Motorola was really good in breakthrough innovation, but it was also the global leader in Six Sigma. And we defined the spaces of Six Sigma people in a certain place, and then the innovation people, and they're both innovating. We know that they're all changing and improving. So it's not that they're not innovating, but we saw competition, sharp elbows. Anytime we got into the existing processes and existing systems, the Six Sigma people, the quality control people were all over it, and they said, we got a great methodology for making it better, faster, and cheaper. And you innovation guys get out of it. And the innovation guys were pushed into the first two columns that you had, which was all about new ideas and all that. So the first question inside here is, how do you navigate when, maybe going behind this question is, are your clients normally resource companies, operation excellence companies, where you're helping them improve their operations? Or are you really helping them coming up with new nascent opportunities?
So it depends a little bit on the size of the client. If you have a smaller organization that you work with, then we work on sort of a relatively high strategic level, like what their whole offering is. So when we work with smaller Swedish companies, but then we also work with Orange business services and like very large organizations, and then it's more about very specific, business design type projects that we do. And the maps are, of course, you use them in quite different ways depending on where you play inside of the organization. So you have to make it fit for purpose.
Okay.
But that's usually not really a big issue. It's the map is a fairly generic tool that you can adopt to many
Yeah,
things.
I agree about the tool. What we run into is the politics of saying that's Six Sigma space and that
Yeah.
innovation space, and why you come in my territory. And there's somebody owning that role or responsibility, and then now we are not working collaboratively as we should.
Yeah, and I think honestly, so there, if you take the whole toolkit to the sort of the extreme, then you actually divide what you offer into a sort of a microservice kind of way. So you actually have teams organized around the components on the map, and then you distribute the components that are far to the right goes to the Six Sigma enthusiasts, and the ones that are very far to the left goes to the pioneers or the very innovative or inventor type people. And then you have to instill a culture of theft. So the settlers steal from the pioneers, and the town planners steal from the settlers.
Love the analogy. I love the analogy.
So that's sort of the general idea. But to get there, it's a pretty long journey to get there. But it is possible. I have not been part of a journey that got that far, but according to theory, at least, it works that way.
No, I mean, I've seen a lot of things across pharma. I mean, I've looked at probably about 50 to 80 transformations of this life size, and the politics is part of it. The org structures are part of the issues. I want to ask a probing question, which is, at Motorola, we were all often asked to create technologies that the world had never used before.
No.
And when we asked customers, would you use it? The answer was always no. Why would we do that? Example was a cell phone. Nobody really said, why would I use a cell phone? There were the phones for 25 cents everywhere, pay phones everywhere. Similarly, whether it's RFIDs, when we asked the market, would you want this thing? They say, I got a key. Why would I need an RFID to enter a building or whatever? So our market segment, which was going to be in the future, didn't even know what it was going to buy. So when there's a strong technology push, not a market pull, how do you use this product, this canvas or this toolkit that you have? Because it makes sense completely for me for market pull. But I'm struggling a little bit on how to do technology push.
Yeah, so I mean, in the technology push type approach that you're discussing now, where you essentially, I showed a slide where I said, what type of experiments do we try to do? So the things you're talking about here is very, very far to the left. So it's just gut feeling, right? More or less. There's no proof that whatever it is they're trying to do is going to work. So, and it's a very big risk to do it. And in Motorola's case, I guess it worked some of the times, and some of the times it didn't work so well.
Oh, we were hitting home runs. We would get out and just swing as hard as we can, and we would miss 3 out of 4, and one would hit, and you're like, whoa, that was it. So yes, there was a statistical failure on that for sure.
Yeah, and I don't think this helps with the actual success of that, but it will help you to actually know that that's what you're doing. So you don't fool yourself that this is going to be some sort of data-driven exploration, listen to the customer, because that's not going to work when you're that far to the left. You have to invent it and show the world what it can do, and then hopefully it works out. And then you can of course question if that's strategically wise to do that, but I mean, you make a choice. It's a strategic choice.
Yeah. What I was thinking in your map, and I don't know if you're the owner of the thinking behind this.
I'm not the owner. This is all, it's open source. I'm a practitioner of it, and I'm not the owner.
I was just thinking that if you had another dimension on that 2x2 that you have, or 4x2, whatever, another dimension on there which says, what does it look like at t equals 0, t equals 10, t equals 5? And so you can say we start off with the government as the first client, and then we go the military as the first client, and then we'll have the rich executives as second clients, and then we'll have maybe the main market as a third client. And we can show a picture of time along with that to make it more dynamic, perhaps. And that may be allowing you to change customer groups customer targets, and also allow you to change new partners and new products along with that. So I just thought there was another dimension that could be very powerful.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. That's something that you can definitely visualize that type of roadmap if you want.
Johan, thank you very much for giving a presentation today. I think it was very insightful, very helpful, very practical and actionable, right? So those are the most important things for our community of practitioners of innovation. I hope many of them will reach out to you directly, and hopefully you guys can do a collaboration, and there might be some opportunities out of that. You too, I will encourage you to reach out to any of the members over here. We meet every week on Wednesday to discuss different topics, just like yours, but there's lots of good conversations that goes on. And, really enjoyed this conversation with you, Johan. It's always good to see a physicist and an MBA and a technologist together. We can move fluidly into multiple conversations around that. So it was a pleasure. And I'm going to give you the last minute to tell everybody what you think they should do. And if you want to make a pitch and ask them to reach out to you, feel free to do that.
So there's so one thing is that maps can feel very intimidating. And Simon, who is the creator of the maps, usually say that it takes 6 years to learn to map. It's and the thinking is, of the 6 years, you spend 5.5 years thinking how difficult it's going to be when you start mapping, and then you start and it turns out it's not that difficult after all. So if you're interested in this, I really encourage you to just start. Read the book on mapping. It's available for free on Medium. If you want to reach out to me, if you have any sort of projects where you think that this might fit, or if you have other innovation management questions, I'm happy to discuss and talk to anyone around that. You can visit our homepage, rhubarbs.se, where we have some descriptions and case studies, and we have a white paper where we use Wardley mapping for change projects and so on and so forth. You can study. And yeah, don't be a stranger. I really hope that some of you, and that we can get to talking about whatever it might be. So I'm very happy to have given this talk, and I hope I see you out there, all of you.
Johan, thank you very much. This brings our GIMI think tank to an end for this week. We look forward to seeing all of you join us again next week. All of these videos and these discussions are recorded, and they are on the GIMI website for anybody to go back and report to. And look, the whole philosophy of sharing innovation is GIMI's objective is to democratize innovation. And if we can get 1 million people trained to think about innovation in a similar way, then we should be able to challenge and tackle on any problem of the world. And so with that, we end this session. And remember again, together we can, and we will. Thank you.